Hello, English 2 students. So today I'm going to talk with you about character development and how an author uses characters to help develop the plot, to portray themes, so on and so forth. So often it can be very simple to identify that a character changes. We know that someone in a story maybe started off as a good guy, then turned into a bad guy, or whatever it may be, so on and so forth. But sometimes it can be difficult to understand how exactly that happens or how the author uses the writing to make that happen. So we're going to talk about that a little bit together today, starting with some of the simple features to some more complex features of this topic. So to begin with, there are a few basic ways that the author works to develop the character. We always start with the description of physical traits and behaviors. You know what this is. This is when they spend forever talking about what the character looks like, the way they carry themselves, so on and so forth. Hair color, maybe what kind of clothing they wear, usually whatever they're wearing. Sometimes that gives away a little bit about them. A description of character response to various situations and settings. This is when it gets a little more complex. The author will put the character into different situations and allow us as the reader to observe how they behave in response to those situations. And that allows us to judge for ourselves a little bit more about the internal values of the character. And then finally, reveal perspectives of the character from other characters. Sometimes when different chapters, I'm sure maybe you have read a book in which different chapters are written by or told from the perspective of different characters. Sometimes each character can have a different view of the main character. And so we can learn from each of those. All of these are done throughout a text with strong descriptive language and a clear plot line. So you should be reading Of Mice and Men, or maybe you haven't started just yet. Hopefully you have, but in Of Mice and Men, you will notice that there is a lot of descriptive language. And so Steinbeck uses that to help us better understand the characters and to develop the characters so that over the course of time, we develop the plot and can pull out some of the bigger pieces and themes of the text. So I'm going to give two examples today, Michael Scott from The Office and Shrek. Hopefully all of you know who these two guys are, but if you do not, I encourage you to watch them. I promise you will not be disappointed. Watch more television, folks. Can't be that bad for you, actually. Okay, so there are two types of characterization, and I'm going to use these as we talk about Shrek and Michael Scott in just a moment here. Direct characterization is when we get that first part, the physical description of the character with their passions, pursuits, maybe what they do for a living, maybe what kind of house they live in, their hobbies, so on and so forth. Indirect characterization describes the character through their speech, thoughts, actions, etc. So that is done through dialogue, the way that the author writes how the character speaks and the things that they think about and the pace of their thinking. Those can also be done through punctuation. For example, sometimes in some texts you may notice that an author will use very short, choppy sentences with lots of periods, so on and so forth, to display the thought of a character. Maybe that character has a lot on their mind and they're trying to sort through it, and so they're thinking in very small little pieces. Other times you might see that there are really long sentences and lots of thoughts streamed together really fast without any punctuation. That's called stream of consciousness. And maybe the character is just in deep thought and can't really clarify their thoughts at the time. All of these work together to create a fully developed character. So essentially you're looking at just the first impressions and then the way that the author presents them through the text itself. Here are some examples with Shrek and Michael Scott. So we know Michael Scott, brown hair, always wears a suit. I don't know of many episodes in which he doesn't. Manager of Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. We know that he's the boss and all of those things. Attitudes and behaviors. Immature, extroverted, self-centered. We know that he constantly is longing for approval from his employees, from the people above him. He seems to be very insecure overall, and most of those things are quite negative, but we will talk about that in just a little bit. Same with Shrek. Just looking upon him in the photo, green ogre, lives in a swamp, prefers isolation. Grouchy, dirty, seems to be very bitter and set in his ways. He doesn't like the fairy creatures to be there in a swamp. Once again, very negative, but we will look at that in just a minute. Then we see that the characters change over time, and we see that throughout the rest of the text through indirect characterization, as we see how they respond to the obstacles and the settings that they are placed in. So once again, just to reiterate, after introducing the roots of the character, the author will put the character into different settings, situations, and obstacles. It allows us to view how they respond to that, and that reveals to us more internal traits of the character. We can see the perspectives others have of that character as well through this, and then we can develop our own views of the character. For example, we already talked about how some of the direct characterization pieces of Michael Scott are very negative. However, here's an example of a situation that he is put in, or that we see from the show, to show that he's really not that negative of a guy. So in the episode The Dundies, I hope that you all have seen this episode. If not, it's one of the best ones. Michael hosts his own award show for the office staff at a Chili's. The viewer sees how selfish his award selections are, and they may view him in that light. He gives awards that are kind of, they seem to be very negative. They kind of, to use the word, roast. Yeah, I know that's kind of cringy to say. The other employees, so on and so forth. However, even though he was doing those things, Pam, Jim, and the rest of the office staff start to support his selections. And we even see that even though he has negative qualities, they all still care about him. An outside perspective may view the office workplace and Michael as very toxic. But through those revelations and through the other perspectives of the characters, we're able to see that they actually have a pretty good workplace dynamic. And they actually very much care about Michael, and he cares about them. And so he ends up being much more of a complex character. Even though he does many terrible things in many of the episodes, we still like him. Same kind of thing with Shrek. At the beginning of the movie, we see all of the negative traits he has. He doesn't seem to care about anything. But whenever he is forced to spend time with Fiona and Donkey, we see that he does start to develop to be more complex. To quote him, ogres are like onions. The more you peel away the layers, there's more depth to him. And you see why he is bitter, and ultimately you end up liking him as well. So that's a lot of talk about basic character development. Now let's get into why it even matters. So first of all, this is how we relate with our characters. There is something so wonderful about when you are reading and you are able to relate with the character. Because a lot of times, the reason why we hate reading is because we don't care. And the characters are so far different from ourselves that we have, nothing to do with them, and it doesn't matter to us. But when we do find a text in which there's a character we can relate with, that can really make all the difference. And hopefully, I hope that you all are able to find a text like that eventually. So it allows us to see ourselves and self-reflect if the character is similar to us. So maybe there's a character in a text that you see that is similar to you. You can self-reflect with that. Would you respond to some of the things that they're going through the same way they are? Would you not? Why or why not? Maybe you see some traits that you know are like yourself, but maybe you don't really like. Or maybe you see some things that are similar to yourself that you do like. Okay? It also allows us to see how others work through those situations, which ultimately allows us to reflect on society as a whole. That's one wonderful thing about reading, is that it gives us the opportunity to reflect on society. So a lot of the situations that happen in books are very similar situations that happen to us in our everyday lives, even if it has some different context. And you can see how the characters respond to those problems, and you can judge for yourself if those are smart decisions or maybe there are better options, and that helps you navigate society. And finally, the author creates archetypes. So archetypes are essentially Character types in stories that appear again and again across literature, they're usually quite symbolic with something within the human experience. You can kind of think about it like a character stereotype. Usually there's a hero in a lot of stories, or the old and wise, if you think about like Yoda or something like that. Someone usually is the mother figure, so on and so forth. And people like archetypes in text because this is what truly helps us relate with whatever the character is going through. Think about it like, to pull away from books specifically for just a second, think about, I don't know, TikTok. I know many of you are on TikTok. Some of you are not, but I know many of you are. And I know that there are TikToks in which someone shares a story, because really TikTok is all storytelling. And I know that sounds very cheesy and whatever, but really it is. A picture says 1,000 words, videos say 1,000 words. People just share stories on there, so on and so forth. But think about those TikToks and that you've seen in which someone talks about when they observed the person in front of them at Walmart being rude to the cashier. Okay, we all know that. Usually people go on rants on there about, oh my goodness, I saw this person do this today. It made me so angry. The reason why we like those videos is because we can sit there and say, same. We relate with them. We have seen people act that way. And it's interesting for us to watch how other people react to those situations. Um, Think about the other things that you look on media, maybe not just TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, maybe just talking with your friends. Think about those interactions. People like storytelling, and every story has characters, and we invest ourselves in those whenever we relate with the characters, and most of the time we do. Authors that are good at their job create complex, relatable characters. And ultimately, what that does is it helps to develop the main point or the plot of the story and then gives us those life lessons, which are also called themes. So, overall, lessons can be learned from the characters as we read how they develop throughout the text. These lessons are not only applicable to the story itself, but also societies in which we live and learn to navigate. Steinbeck uses archetypes and of mice and men to help us understand our human experience. I'm sure your instructor has talked to you many times about how some of the items from the Depression are very similar to items of today or situations of today. I hope that you are having those discussions. And now I hope that you're able to enjoy some discussions about the archetypes in the text and our human experience. So I will leave you with this, and your instructor, I'm sure, will expound upon this. If you need anything, be sure to contact them.